Your generous support makes this ministry possible. Thank you.
I want to get into a continuing discussion of sorts in the area of sexuality, specifically as it relates to the issue of pornography. We've already discussed the issue of homosexuality. And so in some ways, this is really a continuation of this discussion of what it means to be sexually pure. We're missing someone today. Who are we missing? Could you put one in his box, please? Thank you. And wanting to get into this issue, okay, this may cause a little bit of a firestorm with you guys, okay? But you guys are pretty mature enough so that we can have this discussion, okay? If you've heard of late, a big discussion that's going around with President Obama is the issue of gays in the military, okay? It's a big thing. One of his big promises was, I'm going to repeal the ban against gays in the military. Up to this point, the policy is don't ask, don't tell, meaning don't tell me you're homosexual. If you do, then we have to kick you out. And obviously gays and lesbians are wanting to repeal that law and the idea that we want to serve our country regardless of our sexual orientation. A discussion came up that I would love to get your thoughts with. And again, hear me say this right now. I am obviously not advocating for any type of homosexuality, whether in the military or anything. The reality is, we've talked about this already, we know it to be a sin against God. So let me be very clear, I'm on tape saying as well, I am not supporting homosexuality. But the discussion comes up is that why are we limiting our, if I can say it this way, why are we limiting the use of certain people with that sexual deviance only to homosexuality? To put it this way, should we also limit people serving in the military who are fornicators or adulterers or other sexually promiscuous people that we consider homosexuality a sin? Why do we not limit it with other people that are also not abiding by God's standards of sexuality? So I throw that question to you. And again, hear me, I'm not saying that I'm advocating for homosexuality in the military. I am asking, though, should we be more consistent? Because the issue of sexual purity is not just homosexuality, right? It goes greatly above and beyond that. So I put that question to you. Get thoughts?
I would say, at least when I'm thinking about it, it has a lot more to do with not the person and their sin, but like how that sin affects people around them.
Okay.
Because like if you're around a homosexual, then you're more likely to be like, whoa, are they looking at me or something kind of thing? Especially because they segregate by men and women. But then like with other sins, like you know that they're not looking at you. They may be looking at something else, but it's not directly affecting you.
Okay, so the fear, not so much of the individual, but how it's going to affect the others in the troop. Okay?
I think that's pretty, like, when I think about it, that's more how my...
Yeah, and that's a big, I guess, point of argument is that it's more towards troop morale would be lowered or would be concerned of how can I actually fight with a guy if he's going to, I don't mean to be crass here, but hit on me or have interest in me in that sense. So that's one idea, yeah.
Yeah, they're not concerned with his spiritual well-being. That's not why they're dismissing him from service. They're just concerned about the troops in a whole. And so far, I guess, in their determination that if there's a homosexual with a bunch of other men, there could be conflict of interests going on.
So again, getting to the troop morale issue, right?
So something that's personal and is going to affect everybody else. That's why the Army wouldn't
Want.
or
Or any military branch. Yes, Lord, I hear you. Okay. Any other thoughts?
Just with the stereotyping and the typical view of homosexuals, they probably say, oh, they wouldn't be tough enough,
So the stereotypes that we as a culture have towards them? Okay.
Some of those are kind of declining.
Sure. And the proof, I mean, there's a number of people who are obviously no longer in the military that have come out as homosexuals that are in every branch of the service, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, Navy SEALs. I mean, you can find pretty much anyone within any major branch of the military that is practicing homosexuality. So obviously those stereotypes still strong, but really have to go out the window when you see the reality of it. And I guess what I'm asking us to consider, first off, because our reaction as Christians to that issue, I think is somewhat telling of how we view sexual sins in general, all right? And to some degree, I agree with what you guys are saying in terms of troop morale, that we kind of look at it, we should look at it, I think, as a priority of how is this going to affect others? And so the argument, I think, legitimately stems from that. Unfortunately, what I hear a lot of Christians say, though, is why would we want that perversion within our military? That is so sinful and that is so wrong, which is right, but what we do is that we only limit that sexual sin only as being perverse and against God's standard, which it is, but they're totally neglecting all the other sexual sins that are rampant, not just within the military, but within culture at large. That we view the homosexual sin as a very bad one comparatively to, well, I just slept around, that's all. Or I just had an affair, or I just had sex before marriage, as kind of lesser, more accepted sins. And I use the issue of the military as one way of kind of highlighting that kind of, can I say it this way, prejudice that we almost have against sexual sins. That we view some sexual sins as really bad, and other ones as, well, not as bad, and its application, therefore, in each other's lives. And how careful we need to be is what I'm arguing, that we don't make that mistake. Because any sin, sexual or others, before a holy God is wrong. And so that's why I'm saying at the onset that this is actually a continuation of our discussion on homosexuality. I know that's a lightning rod issue within our culture, but all sexual sins before God is a lightning. In fact, we deserve lightning because of it, right? All sexual sin is either an affront to the holiness of God, or when done correctly, is a means of knowing the glory of God. And so to me, that's why I actually want this to be a continuation of what we discussed earlier. Does that make sense? That this is not just, and then we got to talk about pornography in as well. Now, this is actually on the same level in terms of the heinousness before God, in terms of sin, and also the opportunity for knowing God that much more when done in His standard. All right? Let me ask you this question then. When it does come to the issue of pornography, and I'm not going to take too much time, but the article that I gave you here, at least the first couple of pages are facts, figures. I'm not going to go through all that. I'm going to ask you to read through it. Some of the effects of pornography. There's a psychologist who goes through the effects in terms of how it kind of staggers down. And so I'm going to pick it up when we get to the signs. That's going to be on a couple of pages later. Before we get into that, though, generally speaking, how is it that you guys, up to this point in your life, you're in your late teens, 20s, late 20s, how is it generally speaking that you guys have been taught the issue of pornography? Obviously, we don't think it's good. I'm hoping you have been encouraged to do it. Nevertheless, how have you been taught to deal with it if and when it does come up? If I can get some insights from you guys. Think of youth groups, camps, schools, places, family. How have you been encouraged to consider the issue of not just pornography maybe, but the whole big issue of sexual purity?
Web filters.
Web filters. With the hopes of doing what?
Not even allowing those websites to be attainable.
Right, so obviously when it comes to the internet, we realize, again, you've heard this before, and we're not talking too long ago. When I grew up, we didn't even have the internet, way back in the day, right? I had to walk up to school uphill both ways, just so you know. In the snow, in the summer. It was a really bad place I lived. So, internet was not accessible 20 years ago, right? And if you wanted access to pornography, you had to leave your house, go to that part of town that was very seedy and very, not very good in terms of the reputation that it had. You had to go into specific stores and buy specific material, whereas now, any individual with access to a computer and the internet can get the most hardcore pornography within the comfort of their own house. And so with that reality, something like web filters limit the accessibility towards it. Okay, what else have you?
Well, the first thing would be to admit that there's a problem and that face it like an addiction.
What do you mean addiction?
Like, really hard to pull away from, and you sense the need for it all the time.
So treating it like addiction, admitting it's a problem, and seeking help then to deal with that addiction. That's kind of what you've been taught. Okay. Anything else in particular that you remember in terms of your training in the area of sexual purity?
Accountability.
Accountability, meaning what?
Finding someone to be open and honest with and admit.
And not doing it yourself, right? Generally speaking.
Flee.
Run. Good example of that. He's the classic example. By the way, I just did this really great study. I'm in the process of it actually doing, looking at the life of Joseph and David, specifically as it relates to sexual sin. And it's a study in the comparison of the two, where Joseph flees and runs, how he continues to seek the godliness of God. David, specifically in his sin with Bathsheba, does the exact thing he should not do. It's like two polar opposites in relation to the issue of sexual purity. If you want a really good study of what to do and what not to do, Joseph and David are perfect examples. And I'm not trying to disparage David. He is still known as a man after God's own heart. But God in his providence still put that story in the Old Testament to give us warning of what not to do when it comes to the issue of sexual purity. But I was thinking of that and meditating through those two lives, specifically on that issue. Really interesting. Nevertheless, we see Joseph as a perfect example of fleeing youthful lust, right? Not much more. Anything else? Yeah.
Cleansing yourself with the scriptures.
Just knowing the Word, right? The idea of knowing the Word is a means of filling yourself with the good so you don't fill yourself up with the bad. Cleansing yourself. Anything else? Yep.
Literature.
What do you mean?
Books like The Man's Battle or something like that.
Okay, other books that discuss specifically this issue. And one of the things that I'm really trying to encourage us to consider is this idea that we already come to this issue with some preconceived notions, ideas of how to deal with the issue of sexual purity, specifically the issue of pornography. All right? And again, I'm not going to go into the details. You have all the information. You guys know this stuff already in terms of its prevalence, in terms of the realities that people within ministry are dealing with this, and people that we are within the local church are dealing with this as well. So what I want to do is try to provide first some ways of identifying and helping those that may be struggling specifically with pornography. All right? Knowing that it is a reality, knowing that it is a struggle that many people do deal with, how do we then bring help and hope to people that may be struggling with this? All right? First off, I want to give you some ideas of what some of the signs are of people that might be struggling with pornography. A number of them include, in terms of the time factor itself. Now I realize, let me say this at the outset before I start putting all these things up here. What we're looking at is what I call a confluence of signs, meaning you're not just looking for one warning sign that all of a sudden makes grave indication, you spend a lot of time on the internet, you must be dealing with pornography. That's not what I'm asking you to do here, okay? What I'm saying is when you see multiple signs that may give an indication that a person is struggling with it. And even then, I mean, generally speaking, it's not a good course of action to just go up to the person and say, I think you're dealing with pornography. You need to stop it right now. Usually, the best idea is to ask them, to inquire in them. My hope is that you've actually developed a relationship. Remember the coin jar? They've actually invested into their life before you can start taking out of their life. Nevertheless, what we're looking for is a confluence of signs, meaning a group, times that people may be spending on the internet, the computer files that end in specific letters that indicate a certain image that they have a number of times on their computer. Maybe the latest Hubble telescope photos or pornographic material. Discovery of unusual charges on credit cards. This is more so for parents with kids. The realization that they can get access to your credit cards. And are they using it, obviously, for inappropriate use? Generally speaking, websites don't advertise themselves as websites when it comes to credit card uses. If it's a hardcore pornographic website, they're not going to advertise themselves that way. It'll be some like adult entertainment or something along the lines that doesn't graphically display what their business is about. Someone that quickly changes the computer screen when others enter into the room. Again, to give you a note, when you come into my office, more often than not, I'm going to minimize my screen, mainly because there's a lot of files and counseling files that I have on there are of a personal nature. So don't automatically assume that when you come into my office, oh my goodness, did you hear about Mr. Matthew? Don't start spreading those rumors, okay? If taken, though, with a number of other signals, other signs, then you do have right to be concerned. If all of a sudden, and again, we're not just looking for outward examples, but we're looking at the realities of that person. Are they somewhat nervous when they start seeing other people come into a room? Are they responding in a very kind of like got your hand caught in the cookie jar kind of way, right? And you need to be able to pick up on that and kind of see those signs. Changes of behavior, inappropriate sexual knowledge, sleeping problems. Again, with younger kids, you'll see this a lot. Can I just say this, how ugly and deceiving pornography is for kids. Most often than not, kids aren't trying to find pornography. When I say kids, I'm talking about ages 6 to 11 or so. More often than not, they come across it accidentally and then start getting engaged in it purposefully. Does that make sense? They get into it accidentally and then start engaging with it purposefully. Let me give you an example. A number of years ago, this is not the reality anymore, there used to be a website called www.thewhitehouse.com. Any ideas what that website was? Now, why do you think they named themselves thewhitehouse.com? How?
Because people search the White House.
Okay, you know the situation. A kid has this assignment in his social studies class that he's got to research the White House. Great resource to go to? The internet. So he types it in, www.whitehouse.com, not knowing that if you actually want to find the true White House, the place of residence of the president, where should you go? Gov. It's a government agency. You and I know those things, right? If you want to go to an educational site, usually the end is what? .edu. You guys know all those. Most kids are just learning about those realities. So to them, .com is everything. They type it in. All of a sudden, a big screen comes up, and their pornographers are usually so nice. They usually have an I agree to enter or I disagree, meaning if you are underage, you will not enter, and if you are of age, then you can enter. And you would like to think that it's just that, right? But more times than not, they'll have some type of explicit picture right there. She's not naked, but she's not clothed enough to let you know that this is a pornographic site. Now, I'd love to say to you that most kids, 9 out of 10 times, realize, oh, I am not of age, therefore I will not enter into this website. You guys know the reality of this, right? These pornographers are covering their hide, legally speaking, and they can argue, well, we gave them the choice to go away from this, which is a complete bogus, in my opinion, because now this child has entered into this site very, very harmlessly, accidentally, but now is getting hooked into it. Pornographers are looking to hook young children very clearly, because if they get them early, they get them for life. And so, I mean, that's just one example that I've seen pornographers use as a means of really capturing young minds. And the way it affects young people are things like this. Behavior really starts, because they don't have enough of the maturity or cognitive abilities, if I can say it this way, to hide what it is they're getting into. Some adults don't have enough of the cognitive abilities to hide what they're getting into as well, that much less with children. So you're going to see a lot of behavior issues with young children that may be then engaging into pornography. Their young minds, spiritually, they're not able to handle it all, so it's going to come out in some ways. That's something you need to be aware of and know how to address. Becomes infatuated with a computer, be on the computer rather than anything else, regardless of friends or whether. Again, on the internet, late into the night. There's enormous amounts of friends on their buddy list or IM, or it could be some type of friend list, anything like that where they're looking to have a number of avenues to connect to people, perhaps in inappropriate ways as well. The reality of what we're trying to get into is that these are all signs of obviously an inward problem. And so I realize, again, that we all have been given some training, generally speaking, the help that I really want to encourage you to consider, not just for those that you minister to, but can I say for yourself as well, knowing that the work that God's done in my own life in this area has really come through the encouragement of His Word. So let me give you a little personal testimony that most of my life, the trainings of sexual purity, can I say it this way, has been a scare tactic. What do I mean?
Don't do it, you'll burn in hell.
Don't do it, right? If you do it, certain evil things, ultimately hell, But what do you think some of the other scare tactics adults, youth groups, camps, Sunday schools have given to me, and I would say a lot of young people, in order to avoid sexual impurity, specifically pornography and any other types? Think of situations now. People, places. How would you scare a young kid into sexual purity?
Boogeyman?
Pardon me? STDs, sexually transmitted diseases. Don't have a lot of sex, because if it does happen, what are you going to contract? Like? AIDS is the big one. Herpes, gonorrhea, syphilis. I mean, when I was in high school, at least from a very secular standpoint, the encouragement of the health teacher, remember those classes everyone's like, oh, they're going to talk about sex. Woo! The encouragement from her was, don't have a lot of unprotected sex. Why? And then she would show us these terrible pictures of people that were inflicted with syphilis or herpes or gonorrhea, or the new one, at least as it was coming out as more discussed, AIDS. You see these emaciated bodies, and oh my goodness, it would try to scare you in to sexual purity. Now that was mainly out of a secular standpoint, right? Obviously they didn't have a spiritual understanding. So then my question then even continues, if that's how they tried to do it sexually, how do Christians try to scare people into sexual purity? Again, hell is kind of the last resort. We want to keep people away from that. But can you think of other ways that Christians specifically try to use a scare tactic to keep people pure?
You give enough pieces of yourself away and there's nothing left for that.
Right. Consider your future spouse, right? The idea is that one day, most of you are going to get married, right? And the idea is that if you keep giving yourself away, you're not preserving that wonderful gift of virginity for your future spouse. And you're going to struggle in your future marriage with the realities of what you've done in your past and the current relationship you've had, right? Now, let me say this up front. I'm not denying any of these realities, by the way, okay? I'm just asking you, first off, what are some of the mannerisms in which, as a Christian culture, secular or Christian culture, we've used to kind of, using that term, scare us into sexual purity. But that's another one, right? Don't give yourself away because you're forfeiting the joy of what your future spouse can have. What else?
They point out people that you know that didn't wait, and they say, look how horrible their lives are.
Other stories, right? You don't think it's bad now, but listen to Fred and Fred's story, and look what Fred got into. By God's grace, Fred is now redeemed, and he's going on a path of righteousness, but Fred really hates what he did in his past and doesn't want you to get into what he got into as well, right? So they give you some biographies, stories of others who know it was wrong and don't want you to get into it as well. Look how it messed my life up. God's grace is good, covers it, but nevertheless, don't get into it to begin with. Good. Yep.
Along that line, too, we use Bible stories to show them.
Okay. Can you think of any specific ones?
Well, David, and how his child was, did not survive because of his sin.
The consequences specifically of his sexual sin with Bathsheba, right? Can you think of any others that kind of fall in line of that?
We, talk about how your relationship with God is going to be damaged.
The personal realities, right?
There's a lot of Old Testament stories of the Israelites committing sexual sin with the other countries around here.
Old Testament stories, again, of Israel in general, and how more often than not, when they start getting into idolatry, it leads to sexual perversion and the results of judgment that come from God, right? Getting back to the other point, though, the personal story, the reality between you and God, the fellowship is diminished the more sexual perversion you get into, right? And so, obviously, we don't want you to do that. We want you to have a good relationship, lest you miss out on God. Anything else in general? Yeah.
Well, I was thinking also there's STDs and there's pregnancy in the secular culture that are the two.
That's a good one, yeah. If you have sex, you're going to have a kid at an age that you're not prepared to deal with. You're going to forfeit your childhood, as it were. You're going to have to enter into the responsibility of caring for this child. Don't do it, right? And again, I'm not denying that reality, but it's again one of these scare tactics that we generally put on young people specifically to avoid having sexual relations. Good. Anything else in general you can think of, scare tactic-wise? I'll show you one that I had a lot. Does anyone know the name Ted Bundy? Who is he? What did he do?
He's a serial killer.
Mass serial killer. I mean, one of the most notorious serial killers in all of America. Up in the Northwest area during like the late 70s, early 80s, probably killed upwards of 20 or 30 women. I mean, horrendous, evil, evil man, and some of the things he did. He was finally caught, was put on death row, and moments before his execution, he was down in the state of Florida, and he was going to be executed. He had an interview with Dr. Dobson. You guys know who James Dobson is? And they had this videotaped. And so the discussion was between Dr. Dobson and Ted Bundy, this terrible, evil, mass murderer, right? And they have these discussions, and all of a sudden they get into discussion. How did you get to this point? How did you come up? I mean, this guy was well-educated. He was a good-looking, attractive young man. People liked him. He was friendly. He wasn't like this weirdo, pedophile kind of closet person. He was a very upstanding individual in the community. And the question is, well, how did you get to this point? What do you think the answer was?
Pornography?
I continued to fantasize by engaging in pornographic material. So much so that I had to do what? Act it out. That what I saw on the screen, what I saw in pages, what I saw in all this fantasy life, I now had to live out to some degree. So we're watching this. I remember this one point where actually in the interview, the lights start flickering behind them. And Dr. Dobson looks up and says, well, what's that? He's like, they're just testing out the electric chair before I get into it. And you're like, oh, this is, and literally within hours, they kill this man. He's electrocuted by the state of Florida for all the murders he's done. I remember watching this when I was probably in high school. Again, the intent is to freak you out enough that if you don't stop watching pornography, getting involved in this fantasy life, you too will be the next Ted Bundy. So avoid that reality and stop watching pornography. And it scared me, I'll be honest with you. It freaked me out for a while. Fast forward my times when I'm in Dallas, and I'm now working with a youth group, all right? And we're going over this issue of sexual purity. I am trying to encourage them. Let me step back and say, I'm trying to scare them into sexual purity, all right? Maybe using some of the secular models of sexual purity. Don't have sex because you're going to have STDs, you're going to have AIDS, you're going to get pregnant. And trying to use some of these biblical realities as well. You're going to mess up your future relationship. You're going to mess up your relationship with God. Look at all these stories of people that messed up. Yeah, you're even going to be like Ted Bundy. Don't do it. I'm trying to scare them, okay? I'm thinking I'm doing a really good job. And one of the kids after youth group comes up to me. He says, listen, Ben, I got to be honest with you. I've had sex. I watch pornography. I engage in areas of sexuality that I know I shouldn't, given the biblical standards. And to date, this is what he said to me, okay? I don't have any STDs. I'm not married, so I realize this is happening, but it doesn't really hit me yet. I don't know any of these people in the Old Testament. I haven't gotten anyone pregnant. I realize it is affecting my relationship with God, but I haven't become Ted Bundy. I haven't killed anyone yet either. I mean, as I look at all these things as to why I shouldn't do it, this is what he said to me. I haven't done anything. Nothing's happened yet. It really hasn't hit me. Now, he was very clear and honest in saying, I know it could happen. Meaning, I know I could get STDs, get someone pregnant, ruin my future relationship. I could be the next Ted Bundy. I know it can happen. But what he was saying to me was, as I stand here before you now, engaging in this sexual sin, none of this has happened to me yet. And I'll never forget what he said to me next. Ben, I need a better reason. And I'm standing there, I'm like, that's everything I got. I've used a mass murder to try to scare you into sexual purity, and you're telling me it's not enough? So my question now to you guys, because this is going to be a reality for your ministries. Some kid is going to come to you and is going to admit to you, yeah, I know all this could happen, that I could get someone pregnant, I could have STDs, I could be a mass murderer, kind of the extreme of the consequences, scare tactic, but it's not a reality on them now. So my question to you, what else do we give them?
joys of purity,
Such as what?
having a clean conscience before God.
All right.
Being able to lead others.
Closer relationship with God.
So getting back to this reality, can you defend any of these through Scripture as well? At this point, how would you go about actually arguing for this through Scripture? Because I agree with all of those statements, but I'm asking you actually to make the connection between sexual purity and joy in God. That I believe Scripture actually commends those two realities. As you guys are telling me this, I'm like, yes! Where is it? And I'm not trying to embarrass you by saying that, but what I am trying to highlight that while I agree with all this, I don't think we've ever really been taught this very much. Most of Christianity, when it comes to the issue of sexual purity, we've been pushing this agenda. Back in the 80s, there was a woman named Nancy Reagan. Does anyone know who Nancy Reagan is? Does anyone know who Ronald Reagan is? Please say yes, please say yes. Ronald Reagan was and guess who Nancy was? His wife, the First Lady. And she had this agenda because drugs were becoming rampant within America. And she developed this whole agenda in how to combat drugs. Does anyone know what the phrase was?
Just say no.
Just say no. So when some guy comes up to you on the street and he tries to peddle you some cocaine, Mrs. Reagan told me just to say no and walk away. When some kid is trying to sell you dope in high school or say, hey, man, just take a little hit, it's a party, what's up? You can just stand up and say, the First Lady of the United States of America told me just to say no. Inherent within that phrase, though, there is a problem that I do believe even Nancy Reagan was missing out. What's problematic in that encouragement for young people just to say no?
Some people don't ask, they just give it to you.
Some may force it on you. I'm talking more about the individual. I want you to say no, but what are we missing about that individual?
No reason to say no. They don't give me more.
What else?
They just don't know why. They
There's
just
to be something.
You're asking a young person who is in the midst of curiosity and desiring to get involved in anything they can to, within their own power, to avoid sin. When in fact, what do we know about not just young people, but people in general?
Their sinful nature.
They are sinners. And when you tell them to do something, generally speaking, how do people respond? Sinful people respond. They do quite the opposite. My perfect example is seen in Romans, okay? Because that's not only what we've done with the drug culture, but we've done that with sexual purity. We tell people, don't do it. Not just drugs, but sex. Don't have sex. Don't have sex. Don't have sex. And then I started realizing I'm telling young men and women as they are maturing into all the physical realities of sexual curiosity, you know what I'm telling them? Don't have sex. So not only am I working against their biological realities, what else am I working against? Their sin nature. And as soon as I tell them, don't do it, what do you think all of a sudden starts arising within them? And I prove that by exactly what Paul says here. What shall we say then? Is the law sin? May it never be. On the contrary, I would not have come to know what sin is except through the law. For I would have not known about coveting if the law had said, you shall not covet. What happened next in Paul? And then all of a sudden, every form of coveting. Now that doesn't mean the law is wrong. Paul is very clear that it's the law that brings out the reality. And I'll prove this even in your own lives, okay? If I was to put a sign up here that simply said, wet paint, do not touch. If you'd be willing to admit to me all of a sudden, what inclinations are starting to arise within your sinful hearts? You sinners. In fact, you go to paint stores now and ask for those wet paint signs, none of them will say do not touch anymore. Because even Benjamin Moore and Sherwin-Williams realized that to put that on a sign that says wet paint, you are inviting little fingers to come and verify. I really wonder if it's wet. Oh yeah, look at that, the sign's right. that even within that little paint sign saying do not touch, you want to do it. When someone tells me do not covet, I want to covet. When someone tells you don't have sex, you're actually working in the opposite direction. You're actually inflaming. Now, that's not to say that the command of don't have sex before God wants you to have is wrong. As much as I would say do not covet is wrong. It's not the law that's wrong. It's the person that automatically has a bend. And may I say, this is not just for the non-Christian. I'd say this is even for the Christian, because Paul struggles with this. Paul is very beside himself. Why do I do the very thing I know I should not do, and I don't do the thing I should do? Oh, wretched man that I am. This is a Christian struggling with this reality. So I realize on two levels, this scare tactic, one, is not becoming a big reality for a lot of people. Can it? Yes. But I think even before that, it's actually working in an area of inflaming the sinful self rather than actually working in a different direction. And can I say most of my life has been this, to encourage myself and others to scare them into sexual purity. To which I say we need to actually look in a very different way of motivating for sexual purity. Namely, this is the result for Paul. All of a sudden he wants to covet as much as possible. Namely, this passage in Matthew 5. And I'd like to turn there with you to read it with you. Matthew chapter 5 is known as what? You guys know what this passage is all about? Sermon on the Mount. And without getting into all the debates whether or not this is applicable towards dispensational Christians for our current day and age, I do believe at least principles are to be highlighted and understood for the current realities that we live in today. All right? So all of a sudden, as he goes through and he gives all these teachings of blessed, those who are poor, those who mourn, who are gentle, who hunger for righteousness, who are merciful. And then we get to verse 8. After he's gone through all these other beatitudes, we now come to the beatitude of verse 8. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Now, because you've all taken hermeneutics, and you know the proper procedure of observation, interpretation, and application, help me out here. How do we understand this passage as it relates to purity, as he is speaking of those who are pure in heart? I'm asking you to go through the process of helping me understand how to apply this passage in someone's life when it comes to the issue of sexual purity. Interpret this. Do your hermeneutics on this passage is what I'm asking you to do.
See you back in 3 weeks.
All right? I'm not Dr. Van Dyne. I don't give you time. I want you to do it right now.
What is in the verse?
What is in the verse?
And they're blessed.
Okay. Who's blessed?
Pure in heart. We could do pure in sexual sin. Are the pure in heart?
Pardon me?
Can we assume that being pure in heart would make you pure in sexual sin?
Okay. I think that's a wise, and it's, pretty general. It's purity in general, right? So I think that's a good generality to make that we're saying. That not just pure in life, but it applies to sexual purity as well. Good. So we're definitely talking about the pure in heart. What are we saying about that person? They're blessed. How so? They will see what? Specifically the phrase.
They shall see God.
They shall see God. Some translations even say the face of God. And I know that's not the face of God. But nevertheless, what does that mean? They will see God. Help me understand. If you have a pure heart, you'll be blessed by seeing God. So you're saying that when I avoid pornography on the internet, a big shiny image of God will now appear? Is that what this verse is saying? No. Obviously, by my sarcasm, I'm hoping you're picking that up. So what does that mean? If you are pure, God will bless you by letting you see Him. Pardon me? So it's only for heaven. No. Oh, we were just testing you at that point. Is that part of it? Most definitely. So there is a heavenly reality to this, right? That purity in general is a means by which you get to know God, how he's purified us through the work of his Son. But is there another now here dimension of it as well?
What would be the definition and meaning of seed?
Yeah, and that's what I'm getting to. Is it with your eyes? Big, shiny God, all of a sudden, I go away from the internet and pornography of it. Oh, there I see God. Is that what we're saying this is?
Well, either way, there's something that's open. God is open himself to you.
And that's what I'm asking. What is it that he opens to you?
You get to see him working in your life, maybe?
All right? In your life. What else?
Who he is.
To see his will for you.
So it's not so much this blessing is a physical sight, right? We're not arguing that all of a sudden, when I click that little X off that pornographic site, that all of a sudden a big image of God is something I will physically see, right? That's not what we're saying see means here. We're assuming that it means something metaphysical, if I can say it that way. That there's a reality in our relationship with God that when I pursue purity, the blessing of God is something that I will experience, can I say it that way, in my life. Seeing his will, seeing it in my life, if I can say it most basically, experiencing God. Not just what he does for me, not just what he does in my life, which he will, but more and more wonderfully, it's just him. That's the joy of the Christian life. That's the joy of purity. And I realize what I need to start doing in my own life and my ministry to others is not so much scare people into sexual purity. I'm not saying these aren't real and these can and do happen, but I think our main motivation actually needs to be more of a Godward focus. Rather than scaring them away, motivate them to. Can I say it that way? Does that make sense? Instead of saying avoid sex because all these bad things will happen, which can happen, actually give them a reality in front of them by saying, pursue purity, because when you do, you will see God. You will experience the joy of God.
But isn't that the consequence of having your relationship severed kind of that same difference of saying
Of this one?
relationship with God is bad?
Yeah. It's two sides of the same coin, I would see it. I don't want to just say, you're going to miss out on God if you don't be sexually pure. I want to purposefully say, you will see God when you pursue purity. I know it's different ways of saying the same thing, but I think it's important how you say it nevertheless.
It has a different effect.
Exactly. You can catch a lot more flies one way than the other, right? The expression is vinegar than with water. I'm actually encouraging you to use something sweet to attract people to the glories of God rather than something bitter that pushes you away from the potentials of all the bad stuff. I'm not denying that bad stuff can happen. What I'm saying is in your ministry, what if we start encouraging, motivating young men and women to sexual purity because of a good reason? Namely, God. It's the best reason you can get.
Okay. When you're showing this and you're encouraging people with the fact that they will be able to see God, through the times in my life that I haven't been close in my relationship with the Lord, it's like, it's great, cool, and not like that's really not that much of an encouragement to me. Like, I'm not gonna lie. At the different
Compared to the scare tactics?
No, I'm not saying that.
Okay.
I'm just saying that, I guess, how can we use that exactly to encourage them in the way of
In trying to encourage this when you don't feel like it's working,
yeah,
right? Am I saying that right?
yeah,
It's a great question. Because at the moment, because I'm going to make this very practical for you guys, okay? You're watching TV one day. You're on the computer, whatever it is. And all of a sudden, an image comes up that you guys know you should not be watching. Let's stop talking about the kids in your youth group and the kids who can't. I'm talking about you and me, all right? And this image comes up that you should not be watching. Now, you have a choice to make. For a long time, the reason why I should turn that image off is because of all the scare tactics that came before. okay, Ben, if you don't turn this off, you're messing up your relationship with your wife. You're going to get STDs. I don't know how it comes through the TV, but it's going to happen. You're going to get a girl pregnant. You're going to get really bad and become a mass murderer. So turn the TV off was my past motivation. What I'm saying to you is I want to actually get rid of that past motivation and replace it with the sayings in my own life. Okay, Ben, turn that image off. Turn off that commercial. Why? Because when you do, you will see the face of God. Your question then gets to the issue of, well, how do I keep on doing that when I don't feel like that's going to be a reality, right? It is a battle. This does not happen just once. It is a battle of the mind to take every thought captive. And I use both words, battle and mind. That the thing you need to start doing, not just because you start feeling it, is to start pushing your mind to start thinking this way. Not just do the behavior of changing the channel. I am not into behavior modification. I'm into heart transformation. And if I don't change the inward reality, the outward extension of it means nothing. Jesus had a lot to say to those people who had a lot of outward exterior motives. What were they called? Pharisees. He wasn't too happy with them. They did a lot of the right things, but they had no right heart. So what I'm saying to you is that this is most definitely a battle. So my encouragement to you, Mike, in your specific reality, that when this doesn't feel like it's working, maybe it's a matter of us working even harder, praying to God even more faithfully. God, give me the faith to believe that when I really pursue purity, that you and your word really are worth it. Even though I don't feel it right now, may my heart and my mind be exercised to still pursue it. Because it is a battle. It is hard. It's difficult, but it's worth it. And the truth is, if we get to any of this video, which I want to, this may actually even cost you your life. In fact, if your eye offends you as to what you're watching, what does Jesus encourage you to do? Remove it. If your hand that's on that little mouse and navigating pornography all around causes you to stumble, what are you to do? Chop it off. This is warfare. This is hard. I'm not denying that reality at all. But we are so complacent, I am so complacent, that I think, well, if it doesn't work the first time, then why keep on trying, right? No, this is hard work. But why does a guy climb Mount Everest? Can I ask you that question? Knowing that he's going to lose his toes, he's going to be oxygen deprived, knowing that he might not even make it back to base camp, why does that idiot climb Mount Everest?
Say that he climbed on Everest.
Knowing the joy that lies before him. That he's going to be able to say, yeah, I lost a couple of toes on the journey. Yeah, a couple of people in my team got killed along the way, but man, it was worth it. You kind of think he's sadistic, really, I know. But nevertheless, you understand what I'm saying? Can I give you a better passage that helps you understand that? Hebrews chapter 12. What does Hebrews chapter 12 say regarding Jesus and the cross? Who for the joy set before him endured the cross. He did not go to the cross because he had to. Oh, I guess I got to do what a good Christian should do. He did it knowing the joy that would be produced in his fellowship with his Father. Was it hard, by the way? Yeah, the hardest thing this universe has ever seen. It cost him his own life. But the way that he got through it is knowing the joy that was on the other side. And how dare we not motivate ourselves, our youth groups, our camps, our women's, men's ministries with the same joy in this area of sexual purity. We do a disservice, I believe, ultimately to God by trying to just scare people into sexual purity. If you remember in my classes in Intro to Psych when I showed some videos from this lecture, by the way, this is a wonderful resource that I recommend you have called Sex and the Supremacy of Christ. It's a national conference put on by Dr. John Piper with a number of other speakers that wonderfully displays the idea that sexuality, as the subtitle says, sex, created by God, ruined by man, restored by Christ. That sex is not just given to us by God like a gift, like God says, okay, here you go, have sex, do it the way I want you in marriage, now just go have fun, see you later. Sex is not just for procreation, it's not just for recreation, it's for revelation. It's so you and I know God, ultimately. Not just so we have some good times with my wife and husband, right? I mean, that's part of the deal, that's kind of icing on the cake, in my opinion. That's not the main reason God made us sexual beings. He ultimately made us sexual beings so we can know Him, so you will see the face of God. Is it going to be hard? I guarantee you it will be. You may need to pluck an eye out, chop a hand off. Is it going to be worth it? I think so. And I think we're missing out in terms of the training that we need to give people as to why to pursue sexual purity to begin with. I don't know if that answers your question or not. I don't want to negate the reality that it is difficult, that you may not, you know what, you may not even feel at the moment that you're pursuing purity. You may not feel very blessed and see the face of God. You may feel like dirt, right? That's what faith is all about. Faith is saying, God, I still trust you. My faith is feeling really small right now. Help my unbelief, if I can use Peter's words, right? To actually believe that joy is actually on the other side of this. If not here in this life, definitely in the life to come. It's a faith battle, and you gotta put your mind to it. It's not just gonna happen by itself. It's a lot of info. What are you guys thinking? Responding. Thoughts? Agree, disagree? You like, you don't like?
Like,
Why?
because it's, I feel my mind dealing through issue as opposed to scare tactics.
Mhm.
It's bad, don't do it.
Right.
But it's giving a better reason like we could ask
A
for.
purpose. Right, good. Yeah.
We're giving Christ His place because in the
Yeah.
other way it's almost like we're saying that Christ isn't good enough.
And that's the element of what faith is. Can I say that? Faith is you willing to exercise and say, God, I believe that you're better. As opposed to faith, unfaith is saying, no, you're not. This screen is better. And so I love how you said it. It puts Christ in the preeminence, which is a really good idea. That when He has the preeminence that Paul says in Colossians he should have, by the way, that you actually can do that through your sexual purity. What an idea. I mean, it almost sounds icky at one point, right? Sex and God, are they supposed to go together? It's like talking about your parents having sex. You're not supposed to do that, right? It almost sounds weird, but we've never been challenged in this area to actually consider sex as a means of knowing God. And to me, that's what I love, because it truly elevates who He is. Rather than, I'm going to do it by myself, I'm going to figure out this purity thing on my own agenda. I just think that is such a demeaning, ultimately, of who God is. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
I like seeing those scare tactics and seeing that, take it out, like, if you're going to take something out of somebody's life, you have to replace it.
Mm-hmm.
And this verse, like Romans 12:21, do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good.
Yeah.
Like that.
That's what we're trying to do, right? We're not just trying to scare them away from something. We're actually trying to motivate them to something. Again, I'm not denying these realities, okay? If there's times that I can scare people to get away, and I think even that has some legitimacy to it to a certain degree, if I can give you the universal look at it, I don't want to just scare people out of hell. I want to motivate them to the joy of God. I'm not into just giving fire insurance, right? I don't want to just, hell's there, it's scary, get away, and then we just save them away from hell. Is that what the gospel is about? No. The gospel is about life and life abundant in Christ. And to me, that's what the true joy of what this message is, not just in sexual purity, but in any area as well.